Today on the Down the Donut Hole podcast, we have a very special guest from Scotland talking about hypnotherapy, meditation, and other ways to cool down in our nervous world. Okay, we do have Tam on the line, and I know that's not the right way to pronounce it. Tom, is that right?
Well, Tam is the Scottish version of Tom.
Yeah.
Short for Thomas. So Tam is probably what my friends call me, and I would consider you guys friends. So that's certainly okay.
Okay, that's cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we were talking in general on the podcast about the fact that we started naming it actually the nervous news because that's how it's presented over here in the States.
Yeah.
And we got to thinking that, there's a need for some sort of modulation between almost purposeful over-dramatization of all the news. And there's plenty of stuff to be drama.
Well, legitimately worried about, but also there's a threshold for that the average person, in order to remain functional and healthful, they need to be able to shut it off. And if it feels like they can't shut it off, then we were talking about ways,
For one thing, to limit your exposure to any sort of new stuff that you can feel
For sure.
starts to make you nervous. And then to apply other stress reduction techniques like meditation and all that. So we were just curious, because of what your profession is now, if that is applicable to stress reduction in general or not. Fill us in a little bit about what you do and if that's what it's usually used for to help people.
So hypnosis. Do
Hypnotherapy.
you swing a pocket watch in front of people?
Well, that's a misconception, right? A lot of the movies make it seem like it's involved in some mystery stories or something like that, and you can mind control people and get them to do things that they would never
make
do.
them quack like a duck.
Anyway, you can address all that.
So what is it?
Yeah.
How do you do it, and what is it all about?
Okay, so just to begin with, I guess, yes, it's not hypnotism or stage hypnotism. That is pure suggestibility, really, stage hypnotism. And hypnosis is basically a trance-like state that we can induce through relaxation. So we use relaxation techniques, and we are ultimately aiming to lower the brainwave states of an individual, moving from high beta brainwave state down through the brainwave states to alpha, then to theta. Theta is ultimately where we want to be getting an individual, where we want their brainwave state to be. And that is a deep relaxation state. Some people call theta brainwave state the gateway to the subconscious, because once you're there, you can then ultimately affect our neuroplasticity. So, and you can do so through positive affirmation and intent and focus in order to do so. Now, there's a few ways we can go with this conversation, because I could talk more to the fact that our neuroplasticity changes over the years. When we're really young, we are actually in our child stages. We're actually we're constantly in a kind of fluctuate between an alpha and a theta brainwave state, which means that our neuroplasticity is more malleable and it adapts to the environment more easily. But as we get older, it kind of hardens and becomes more rigid, and it's harder to alter our neuroplasticity.
So you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Is that fair to say? It's harder to teach an old dog new tricks than it would be for...
Kind of, yeah. That is how that would apply to that. By the age of 25, it kind of solidifies a bit harder, and it's no longer easier to change the neuroplasticity.
Takes more work.
So in order to do that, though, we want to get back down into the theta brainwave state. And we can do so in deep meditation or in hypnosis. Now, the difference with hypnosis and meditation, although there are guided meditations. Hypnosis is pretty much guided, and we are setting positive affirmations with direct intention to create positive states of mind. And if someone has a specific problem, say they are depressed, it makes sense to try and orientate them towards the things that bring them joy, the things that excite them, and towards a vision of a new self, shall we say. So you can build an image of a new self, and by orientating towards that vision or an idea of that new self, the neuroplasticity changes over a number of weeks, and you become your new self by overwriting the old patterns of neuroplasticity. So we kind of prune away, if you like, the branches of neuroplasticity that we no longer use. So you may have heard the quote from Hebb, who was a neuroscientist back in the 1950s, I think it was. He said, neurons that fire together wire together.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So the idea is that the more that we use neural pathways, the more they fire together. So the synapses fire together, and you create these neural pathways that basically these create like programs, you could call them. I guess that's kind of the best metaphor, is like a computer program that we create. It's more like the hardwire, actually. It's actually more thought of as the hardwire of the brain.
So
the hardware of the brain, rather.
Is this just getting rid of like old habits by forcing yourself into new patterns, or is that
kind of? Yeah, kind of. But we're doing it, through hypnosis. We're doing it in a relaxed state, because that's the only way you can really do it. Well, in fact, the only ways you can change neuroplasticity is through great trauma or deep meditation, a deep meditative trance-like state. Now, the thing is, if we endure a great trauma, our neuroplasticity can change almost immediately. And if we don't work to change it back to a more positive way, it then hardwires, and then that becomes our state, if you see what I'm saying. So we're ultimately, this is the kind of objective science behind hypnosis, if you like, or the objective science behind what happens in meditation as well, which is ultimately what we're doing.
Is it getting more mainstream, where for victims of any sort of trauma, are they being steered toward hypnotherapy now, or is that still needing to be more?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. But if someone endures a major trauma, it's important to get them within the first few weeks of that trauma, because it's easier to readjust.
Because it isn't hardwired yet?
That's what I was going to ask you, if it's time sensitive, and how long is that time generally?
I wouldn't know the exact figure on that.
I know that here in the States,
it's within the first few weeks.
And that would probably change from person to person too. So it's the kind of like thing, do as soon as possible, and don't
they talk about
take a chance.
Yeah.
Trauma-informed therapy, but usually that's more traditional therapies, where you go, you talk to a counselor, you work through the stages, of repairing damage that's been done. But it's more of a verbal thing. It's less trance-like, I think, in general usage over here. And I have not heard about the hypnotherapy, but I think it makes a lot of sense if that's a guided thing. Now, theta.
I believe so.
Is theta the state? So. Is theta the state where
the lowest frequency in brainwave? Is that right?
Yeah, but is that where the lucid dreaming takes place, in that state?
Oh, sorry, you cut out a little bit there. Could you just repeat that one?
Yes. Is theta the brain state?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us? Hello?
Yes. Go for it.
Is theta?
Yes, go for it. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is theta the state where lucid dreaming takes place?
No. So theta brainwave state is the state above sleep.
Okay.
So delta is the brainwave state that we fall into in sleep.
Okay.
So as we go to sleep, we automatically we drop through the brainwave states, and delta is the lowest, the kind of the slowest brainwave state, if you like, and that's when dreaming would happen, is in that in delta. And dreams is a whole other thing, That's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, a lot of therapists, psychologists dismiss dreaming as just a process of kind of organizing our thoughts of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of removing the emotional impact of the day's events. But from a Jungian approach, like Carl Jung, or the psychoanalytical approach is that dreams are actually communicating something from the unconscious. So that's a whole other thing altogether. But I believe that we can learn a lot from our dreams if we want to interpret them. But that's that would be a whole other conversation, I think. But,
So how does the Jungian how does the Jungian connect with the hypnotherapy?
Well, the models that I know are different, but I don't see a conflict between the two. The therapeutic model, the hypnotherapy, is all orientated towards building positivity, building a future self, trying to generate natural, beneficial neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, all these kind of things that we can do through positive thinking, through positive interactions with people, through building community, through positive activities. So we can build all these natural neurotransmitters from our own body, which some people turn to addictions in order to get those neurotransmitters. Right. And in doing so, they actually reduce the body's natural ability to create these neurotransmitters. So that's another aspect to, if people are in a kind of a state of anxiety, depression, or anger even, they are not producing these positive neurotransmitters. So you can kind of counteract that by positive interactions with people, by positive activities, and so on and so on. So that's part of the therapeutic model that I do. But the Jungian model that I use in coaching does include working with dreams. Also, it includes working with fairy tales even, and kind of what a process of what's called individuation, where we're trying to connect somebody with their latent potential. Quite often, people feel discontent in their life because they're not really aligned with who they truly are. So that they're maybe doing a job that doesn't really align with their abilities, and have not really reached their full potential in life. So there's an unconscious potential. And it's all to do with ultimately the homeostasis of the body. The mind-body system is a self-regulating system which seeks homeostasis. So if we are discontent about something deep inside us, our unconscious is trying to tell us something, or the subconscious, or the body, the mind-body system is trying to communicate something. And the only way it knows how, and that is through feeling unease, anxiety, depression, or anger, usually. So I see no conflict between the two models, but I'm still kind of trying to unite the two of them in some kind of unified model. But I think that's that will emerge over the coming years.
What does a typical hypnotherapy session look like? When a client comes to you, how do you begin, and how does it progress?
And also, do you always have to do this in person, or is it something you can do over the phone, for instance?
I'm doing it all over the internet at the moment, over Zoom at the moment. It's all Zoom calls I'm doing. So, and I do it in person as well, but obviously based in Scotland, kind of limiting my potential client base. But so a normal session would tend to be, well, initially it starts with the first consultation involves an explanation of how the brain works, or roughly how how we have a kind of primitive brain, the earliest part of the brain, which is the limbic system, which is our fight, flight, freeze reaction system, reactionary system, you could call it. And that usually operates, basically your fight, flight, freeze is basically translates as fight is your anger, freeze is your depression, and flight is anxiety. So it basically translates as that. So when we're in that state of mind, we no longer have access to our rational brain or logical brain, and we have no access to our creativity. So the initial consultation kind of involves a discussion around that and looking at how we're going to try and move somebody out of that primitive brain into those higher intellectual centers, but also just making us feel better, because a lot of our problems do arise from just a faulty way of thinking or looking at the world. And that then translates into the body and affects our regulation of the nervous system. So sometimes our body reacts before we are conscious of it. And, there can be a number of reasons for that, but each individual is really different. This is important as well, is that I don't tend to treat the symptom. I treat the individual, looking at their individual experiences and what's going on with them, and then I try to deal with the problem with them. I'm kind of a container for the client.
I see.
So after the initial consultation, the sessions would then go something along the lines of what they've been doing for their week, building positivity within that session, and then looking at what small little aims and goals we can set in order to orientate them towards that future self that they imagine and that they desire. And then once we've built that positive vision and set intentions, we then go into the hypnosis and then reaffirm a lot of what we've said in the session. And in that deep theta state, it should all begin to sink in deep into the subconscious, and then they'll take that forward into their week, and they'll just continually build on that. Ideally, they just kind of small steps if necessary, but they just kind of continually build and build. And then, a matter of months down the line, they could be completely transformed, their whole world. Because if you transform yourself, if you transform your thinking and your thoughts, you transform your world ultimately. We see the world as we are, not as it actually is.
So it's a dynamic process, it sounds like, Tom. You're sort of sensing a vibe from them, so to speak, and that might alter your approach with this particular individual.
Yeah. Well, because people are not always necessarily aware of what the underlying problem might be. They know that they're discontent, they're unhappy, or they might have an actual physical illness. I mean, I'm not talking about some kind of disease or, incurable disease. I can't deal with those. Although there is some people argue that there is space for that as well. However, they may just have, like something such as, back pains or irritable bowel syndrome or something, and they've always kind of had it. And you'd be surprised what hypnosis can help with. It can actually, or hypnotherapy can actually, once you fix the mind, it kind of extends out to the body as well. Because, I mean, in the world of psychology, not many psychologists kind of see the body as an extension of the mind, but it really is. So if you can fix the thinking, then you can also fix the body. So yeah, each individual is different, but it also depends on if they've had certain traumas or they have certain external problems in their environment. So it is all unique. It's all very unique to the individual. So it's tailored to the individual's needs.
When the individual calls you, Do you have a setting that you prefer for them to call from? For instance, a quiet room, or should there be music playing, or what helps people generally get into that theta state so that this healing can begin to happen in a more organized way?
Yeah, well, usually when I am called, it's better if they're in a room, certainly on their own, and there are no distractions. A quiet room, ideally, and the first part of the session, they can be sitting, talking to me on a laptop or their phone or whatever, and then when we move into the hypnosis stage, it's best for them to be lying down in the most comfortable position that they can. Some people suggest to put a cushion under the knees so that they don't roll over and fall asleep. And it's often a cushion under the curtains actually helps them not fall into sleep completely. Now, there are I've seen some hypnotherapists suggest that it's okay for someone to fall asleep because you subconsciously still hear the hypnotherapist's voice, but I disagree with that. I think you have to stay awake. You have to be in the theta state because that's where the neuroplasticity changes, and they have to do so focused and with intention, or at least it works better that way, and we see results quicker that way. So yes, so comfort in a quiet room. I actually play music at my end. And the whole music aspect, the whole, that's a whole other conversation in itself as well, because it does need to be relaxing music. It can't be something that they choose, because if it's music that the client chooses, then they know the tune and they'll be distracted by it. So it has to be something that is that doesn't distract them, and quite
that seems
designed with the purpose of meditative states of mind.
Does it seem something that seems sort of ambient to them, that they're not going to be tapping their foot or singing along in their head or something like that?
Yeah. And some people suggest certain frequencies. The whole 432 is I don't know how much truth to it is. Maybe you could talk more to that, Dave, and certainly in terms of the frequency. Apparently, it's a multiple of the frequency of, is it the Schumann resonance?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's an upper harmonic. But there's a lot of science behind the fact that they actually helps plants grow and that sort of thing. It's pretty hard science that there is some positive effect from it.
Yeah, certainly I've heard that, and I've not seen it directly because I've not really researched it myself, but I'm certainly aware of the 432 suggestion. And I've actually my track is tuned to 432, so I certainly I take it seriously enough to use that in my tracks, but I've just never really directly seen any research myself. However, as long as it's relaxing, ambient, and I would definitely recommend you go for 432. And and people do say other frequencies are good frequencies to use. I've also I've been recently looking at the binaural effects, which I've not employed yet. But if I was going to do the binaural music over the top of me talking, then I would obviously, the clients would then need to use headphones.
Exactly, yeah.
So I don't necessarily need headphones, but if I was to go down the binaural route, then
it would have to have that. Yeah.
And that becomes a little less comfortable for people, and it may actually. You have to weigh up, I think, the short-term gain from the long-term gain with that, and just the disruption from feeling like you can completely relax with a headset on. I don't know, especially if you're lying down. It becomes an issue in that way. So
the other frequency that I'm quite interested in and have been for a while is 40 hertz, which is involved in what they call gamma synchrony. And they have found that the
Okay.
brain, the communications, a lot going on in different parts of the brain, and they all have to communicate. And it has been shown that exposure to 40 hertz does actually help coordinate all the different parts of the brain better and bring it back into complete focus, basically, so that the communications network between the different parts of the brain are cleared up. The traffic is more organized, and it seems to flow a lot better with this exposure to 40 hertz,
Is that?
which is the lowest note on a bass guitar, I think, right?
But it's also a cat
Okay.
purr. Is it not a cat purr?
Only the cheetah achieves 40 hertz, but yeah, it's I did actually synthesize a purr at 40
Yeah.
hertz with a little bit of offset to make the purr happen. And yeah, it does seem to be really visceral, just sort of primal almost.
Yeah, I mean, it completely makes sense. If we look at cymatics underlies
Yes.
all of reality, ultimately, doesn't it? A vibration. Even if we're considering, even if we consider the fact that quantum physics underlies all of reality, and
It's really going down what we call in our show down the donut hole. And
yeah.
But
That's why I'm kind of hesitant to go down that.
Don't just take the dive. Take the dive.
Well,
You'll feel better.
I'll just say one thing, and it's what I always like to think, and it's kind of mind-blowing, but it is the true reality of thing, is that everything, all substance that we're aware of in our world, including ourselves, are really just a complex electromagnetic waveform.
Yeah. Now, you probably know the science a lot better than me on that, but certainly what I do know is that, if we consider consciousness to be fundamental to all that, so consciousness underlies all of it, and matter is just really kind of an illusion, really.
Yeah, that's right.
Then it is all connected.
Quantum physics shows us that.
But
Sorry, say again?
it does freak a lot of people out, and they can't think about that too much. But
But
it
you
does
should
show
think-
that everything is connected, because with the
Yes.
quantum field theory of having the so-called ether literally everywhere, and that matter as we know it are just disturbances in that connection to that pipe. Call it a wire or whatever you want to call it. But
Yeah.
it is kind of comforting to know, on the other hand, that does mean that everything is connected, and we are all connected.
And there's a lot
Absolutely.
of
And
responsibility
yeah,
with
go on,
that
sorry.
then. There would be, once you reach the place where you accept that everything is interconnected, that you are not an island unto yourself, then there is a responsibility, a much higher sense of responsibility, as opposed to your freedom of action, freedom of choice, all of that, because all of that needs to be made in the context of a community. So,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing when
Yeah.
you
And yeah, I mean, if we consider as well, going back to consciousness, that if you look at the observer effect in quantum physics, what it shows or suggests, from what I can see anyway, or from interpretations that I've seen, is that consciousness affects matter. It's not the other way around, So that does suggest that consciousness, which is a hard thing to define, that there's a lot of miscommunications about consciousness, even within science itself. It doesn't seem to agree. Scientists can't seem to agree on what consciousness is.
Right.
But if we see it as something that underlies everything, that consciousness affects matter, not the other way around. Matter, the material reality, is dependent on it is affected by everything else that is around it, whereas consciousness it affects matter, it affects the direction of our life, and
It kind of actually kind of creates it in a way, if you want to think about it that way. It kind of creates matter, the consciousness.
I think, therefore, I am.
Yeah, that's an idea,
in a sense, yeah.
Wow, guys,
Yeah, this
this
is
is pretty
great.
heavy stuff. It's very down the donut hole at this point.
I think we could do several shows about this sort of thing.
Also, I would
Well, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
I would love to say, in your music experience.
Music in the brain.
You have been part of the music scene in Scotland forever. I know you've traveled to the continent, you've traveled everywhere making music. Do you have, every time you do it, do you have that palpable sense that all of these random people that are in the room listening to you play, that there is a point at which they become one? That consciousness coalesces into a common experience. Does that feel good? Do you feel that when you're making music?
Yeah, I mean, but we're talking about, I guess, something that is transpersonal. It is beyond. It's kind of beyond words, really, isn't it? Because these experiences can't really be contained within language. I mean, I think that's speaking again to higher levels of consciousness, or what underlies all of reality, or the ineffable, shall we say. It cannot be bottled and explained by science. These are deep archetypal experiences, and yeah, I mean, I find a lot of that hard to explain away. But certainly, if we see it as an archetypal pattern, let's say, it's this kind of community experiences have been kind of have been used throughout time, throughout history, by humans to unite people. Even if we look at ceremonial shamanic practices, we can take it back to the tribes and how they would all get together and work themselves up into a frenzy, or in service of something greater than themselves. It was all about unity and all about this orientation towards something bigger or higher than themselves. If you don't have that orientation towards higher values or something bigger or better than yourself, then that's when you start seeing the disintegration of societies or civilizations.
No question.
There's no unifying principles. So that small experience in a music hall is a fractal, if you like, of the larger community things that can happen, on a larger scale. The collective has been somewhat lost, or collective goals or collective aims has been lost as we become more and more individualized. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with individualism. I think it's quite often a false dichotomy, a bit like the non-material and the material is a false dichotomy. I think they're all one and the same. A bit like form and formlessness is one and the same thing. I can't remember the Greek philosopher, was it Epictetus, that talked about how the two opposites are really one and the same thing. You can't have one without the other.
The yin and the yang kind of concept, huh?
We've kind of lost touch a bit with what it means to be part of a collective, because as soon as you say collectivism nowadays, it's associated with communism,
right?
Yes,
and which is kind of a shame. I think it's it does it a disservice, because I think once you politicize something,
right,
that's the problem we have.
It has an agenda, it then becomes a tool for someone else to use.
Absolutely.
This marriage of religious ideologies with political agendae, it in the end, it winds up being very divisive, and it is much more damaging than it would seem like it should be, because everybody believes that their religion is a catalyst to a much more spiritual self, but that doesn't translate with society, the regulation of society, usually. I don't think. I mean, that's personal opinion, and I think here we're seeing that more. Things are crystallizing, and instead of government being freedom from religion, in our country, it's becoming much less sectarian and much more
dogmatic.
And
I could talk for a long time about that.
It isn't just a subconscious thing that's happening to them. that it also demands of them some conscious efforts. And do they take stock of that at some point, during the therapy course?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, a big part of the initial consultation, we're talking about how the primitive brain runs. If that's running our life, then we are no longer really in control of our life. Now, and a lot of our hardwired negative behaviours and habits, because they're habitualized, we are not aware of them quite often. Now, this kind of leads into, I guess, the Jungian idea of the shadow and our unconscious behaviours. So a big part of certainly what I encourage is people to try and become aware of their habits and the ones that they want to change consciously. Mm-hmm. And so it does require a bit of consciousness, or what could be also, if we're talking about fixing the way they think, it could be considered what's called metacognition. So that is the ability to think about our own thoughts or to reflect on our own thoughts. And in the process of reflecting on our behaviours or our thoughts, we can consciously alter our behaviours towards our desired self or desired outcome. And I mean, there's another argument I would say for the fact that consciousness is not the brain. So the brain is kind of what we see objectively, but consciousness is a non-material thing that operates the brain. A bit like an avatar, the consciousness. Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, this is a whole other discussion, but I think that
indeed, I have a crazy theory about all of that, but I agree with you 100%. It's not the same thing.
Does that metacognition? Do people?
Yeah, go on.
Do people? Let me say, is it a common thing for people to be able to reflect on their own thoughts and their own ability to maybe empathize or things like that? Is that something that has to be taught to a person? To empathize, to think about how their thoughts and how they affect, the sphere of influence around them. Is that something that's automatic that we all know how to do, or is that something that requires practice and training?
Well, they say that over 90% of our daily lives are operated by the unconscious or the subconscious. So we are completely unaware. And that includes things like, when we feel hungry, our body tells us that we feel hungry. And that includes, when we're driving a car, we don't have to think about how to do it all the time. It's hardwired into the brain. So all those processes become unconscious. But it's also, just habits, bad habits we have, negative behaviours, etc., how we treat people, etc., etc. And you're right, like some people that have no empathy, that is a negative trait that some people are completely unaware of. Now, with regards to whether we can expand our awareness of that, I think that, this is my personal take. I don't know. I'm not sure where the science would be on something like, and it probably varies from person to person, but at which point do we become conscious of our own thoughts or our own behaviours? Are we always kind of a little bit conscious of something, and does that always expand? Does that consciousness grow? I'm not sure what the science would say on that, but I do believe that awareness is something that expands, and there's no limit to it. I don't think there's any limit to it. I think it's something that can continually expand.
The only limit would be
more and more.
The only limit would be the universe, and connect, and how much you are able to connect to it.
Is that
connect to the universe? Sorry, say that again. You got a little bit there.
The only limit would be the universe and your ability to effectively connect to it, and infinity itself, really.
Is that like
Yeah,
the idea of Sophia, of achieving wisdom layer by layer? Is that kind of like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, if everything's connected, then all the philosophical concepts along those lines would have to be connected in some way.
yeah. I mean, I believe so. I think all the ancient philosophies, I mean, even all the old religions, they're all kind of talking about the same thing, but from a different perspective and in a different cultural clothing, if you like. It's all different language, different ways of saying the same thing. You know, you could say that logos in the Christian faith
Yes.
is this kind of underlying principles that orders the universe. You know, it's like or chi or the Tao in Taoism is the same thing that's getting talked about, or prana. You know, all
Yeah,
these underlying,
exactly.
or we could even say the Force in Star Wars is the same thing. You know, that we're kind of all talking about. It's this universal consciousness that kind of exists in all things that we are part of, but we see ourselves as separate from. So I think that certainly there's an argument to suggest that in deep meditation, it could be argued in deep hypnosis, although some would say we can go further with meditation because, you know, you're not required to be guided there.
Right.
So say in deep meditation, you can move beyond the body and almost like going back to source consciousness, and you can tap into this vast source of information, knowledge, wisdom. I mean, some people say that that's where it comes from, because sometimes we know, you know, when even in our younger years, we don't necessarily have the experience, but we just know things. We just have an innate knowledge of deeply profound things. And where does that come from? Or how can we be born with certain knowledge of
Do you think that people adapt socially? Okay, I guess that's it. That call dropped. Thank you so much, Tam. We'll get back with you and say our goodbyes in another session. And we thank you so much for calling us.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Oh,
no
we
problem.
have. We still have
we
you.
thought you're still here. We thought we lost you, but I think probably we should wrap it up.
Yeah, we don't want to keep you forever.
Yes.
But if you want, you can share some contact information for
Yes.
yourself.
Yes. Tell me what to put up, because
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, certainly, yeah. I mean, it'd be good to talk a little bit more on any of these kind of subjects that we've kind of.
I think we could have you on as a regular member and still have plenty to talk about.
Would you?
Yeah.
Would it be okay to have you on regularly where we talk about some other stuff? This was fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. For sure. I mean, we might want to hone in a little bit more on maybe
that's
specific topics. I think. But
this
certainly,
was
for
good.
sure, yeah. And thanks for having me. You know, but if anyone wants to have a look or you know get in touch to see if hypnotherapy is for them, they can find me at sunwisehypnotherapy.com.
Okay.
Or if they want to check out my music, probably the easiest place is pillowstone.co.uk, and
even YouTube channel, Pillowstone Project. So there's a few places where you can see what I'm doing. I'm working on things all the time. So yeah, feel free to even find me on, any social media.
How would we search your latest release? I saw you send me a link, but what search terms would people use to find your most recent release?
So that was it's more kind of traditional based Scottish music, or it's really music from the Celtic fringes of Europe, because there's a couple of songs in there, one from Ireland and one from which actually kind of popped up in the States, actually in the United States, but amongst Irish and Scottish immigrants. So it's believed that it probably travelled with the immigrants to America, and it resurfaced there. So it's kind of Celtic songs, really, in their root. But so that's with my band Pictism, who I perform
in with Lucy Haig, who's also a Celtic knitwear designer. You can find her stuff online as well, Lucy Haig Knits. She creates intricate Celtic patterns and knotwork. Very, very interesting stuff as well. So, yeah, and you'll find our music on there, on Pictism on that website, pillowstone.co.uk. We're also on Instagram, and you can find our new album called Reviver on all streaming platforms. So I'm sure whatever streaming platform you have, if you search Pictism, Pictism, you will find us.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect. And say hi to Lucy for us, by the way.
Yes, yes. Tam, thank you
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much. This was a fantastic introduction to
amazing.
all that stuff. And I think the next calls we can be much more specific, kind of hone in on various aspects. But this was a really good overall thing. And I think that people will really enjoy hearing it, and that it will spark a lot of curiosity about this whole topic and all the offshoots that we kind of touched upon in this session. But
I hope so. Yeah, I hope people enjoy it. And if there's any questions, either get in touch with you or get in touch with me, or if there's anything specific that someone would maybe want us to talk about more, then we can certainly do that, I'm sure.
Tam, thank you very much. This has been most enjoyable. And we thank all of our listeners today. Be sure to count your blessings. There are many, I assure you.